Hey everybody, it's good to be back. So this is going to be the first video. It's pretty straightforward. What we're going to be doing here is looking at essentially the Automata system that I actually really built 4 years ago, but I rebuilt it from scratch. I didn't have a computer for playing the sim at all until April of this last year, 2019. And so I've rebuilt it all up. First and foremost, I'd just like to thank the devs. They've really done a remarkable job. Everything looks so good. The game plays quite well. I do, of course, still wish I could put more AI aircraft, but everybody already knows that, and there's no point in grousing. One thing I would specifically ask for, and I will probably ask for in more videos, is the ability to put more things on deck as effectively deactivated things that aren't happening. If the size of the .mission file is greater than about 9 megabytes, it starts to actually hurt the performance, period. So that does make it a little bit difficult. I could make missions be considerably more dynamic, reactive, and just simply random variant for multiple plays if I could put more deactivated units and have more logic controlling when units became activated, but still maintain exactly the same number of currently active units in the game. It would really be totally awesome, and I suspect that's a lot easier to do than it is to add in a whole bunch of active units and have that be performant. Speaking of which, and maybe on the other side of that, everyone should be incredibly impressed with the fact that the AI actually flies these aircraft. That's my story there. Nobody else does that. Anywho, this system, when you pull it in, I've got the groups over here, and of course we'll go into this in more detail eventually, really soon even. So eventually is soon eventually. The units over here are really everything that is listed up here above the sprue that is highlighted is inside the sprue. And so each one of these are just there for convenience for pulling in as you build a mission. The sprue is, if anybody that's built model airplanes probably knows that word. If not, there's Google. The sprue basically includes one of every type of module for each side, be that central and allied powers. Everything is set up, or intended to be set up, I'm sure I got some bugs in there, to work just fine for World War I or World War II. And so the basic thing to know about is that everything is designed with the concept of even reconnaissance in mind. So if I take for a simple example, as we go in here and we look at the German things, we have a frontline, air unit, tank, ship, road, river, and rail. And just to go through these quickly, these air units are considered to be AI aircraft. Tanks behave like tanks, but you can really make them change and be differently. Ships behave kind of like an armada or a group of ships. And these three units each have one of four possible routes that they can take, and you can control which set of routes they take in a sequence, or you can have it be relatively random. And they do some form of attack or action near the end of their behaviors. Road, river, and rail are all designed to move in a column. So road by default is off-road column, but it's very easy to switch to on-road column. We'll talk about that in a bit. River is boats that just are more intended to go on the river. And rail is, of course, a train. So each of these things have encapsulated inside them the behaviors and machinations to be relatively sane in most circumstances, and are very easy to modify to do different things. So like they take actions when they run out of ammunition. They take specific actions if they get damaged. They know how to go forward. They know how to go towards their objective and return from it. In a lot of cases, in some cases like the rail, it can't turn around. But like the cars can turn around. They can go towards a depot. Like you can send trucks to deliver supplies and they can return. The flights can go out and come back. You can even have them go out one route and come back another. We'll talk about all that in a little bit. And everything is designed with reconnaissance fundamentally in mind. So, as I mentioned earlier, I believe. So if we look at the ships here first, you can see that there are some icons. These icons display the route that this is specifically the river. These are the ships. They have 4 different routes. We'll talk about that in a second. So these icons here are visible only to the German side by default. And German side icons in general, there's some exceptions to this, are black. And Russian side or Allied side are red. And so if you manage to get some units to these check zones over here, which you can place anywhere you like, but by default are kind of where the ships start out, then what happens is that depending on how we have it set up, how it's set up by default, which is the simplest, are all the icons will turn on and be visible to the opposing side. So if the Russians can fly over here or get a boat over here, or somehow get a tank across that water over to this check zone, then it will actually allow, it's effectively reconnaissance and will allow the Russian side to see on the map the icons. And we'll, of course, show the map here very shortly. The in-game setup here in just a bit. I'll probably even do that at the end of this specific video. So let me go through these guys in order, and we'll talk about all the little things that they do. The first one here is frontline. I should point out as well that the Russian side is just exactly the same thing, just converted to Russian. And for frontline, we'll just talk about super briefly. It has an influence area. It comes with a single airfield you can copy and paste. It has every single plane available in it. That's because I find it easier to cut away than to add. So it just has everything on there and just delete the ones you don't want and make any modifications to them that you wish, locking loadouts or whatever you like. It's not hard to do that right at the beginning and then copy and paste it for the different airfields that you want to have. And it also comes with 2 artillery sets, each with 10 artillery inside them, kind of grouped up and with some nice placement of static stuff. You can, of course, change any of that static stuff, whatever you want. And this will be the first of the control setups that we're going to see. And there are 2 basic control setups for the artillery. Most of the other things have quite a bit more. This block of units, if we turn on where we can see everything, you'll see there's a small amount of stuff inside it. We can look inside it, actually. There's just a little bit in there. This is actually a timer. I should actually mention the timer. It's kind of handy. It's very difficult for anyone who's built a mission, other folks probably wouldn't have come across this, to have a timer that you can start and under a condition turn off before it is triggered and ensure it doesn't end up firing. Because one of the problems, and this has been actually on and off across different versions of the editor that I've seen, I don't know what state it's in right now, and I'm just not going to mess with it because it's not consistent enough, is that if you hit a timer with a trigger and then before the timer goes off, you deactivate it, then the timer will signal when you activate it. And that is basically unacceptable. So that system in there is relatively complex for what it does, but it allows you to start a timer and conceivably turn it off. It has some limitations, but we'll talk about that when we get to the core units, which are what everything is built out of. Anyway, most of the things in the game follow a kind of pattern where it's like a function, and this is the inputs on their left and the outputs are on the right. So these represent the 10 artillery. And this little bit right here is just a default kind of startup doodad. We'll talk about this right here in a moment, which was about that thing with the icons I was talking about. I almost always have the case that the top left and somewhat indented timer is on, and the bottom left and somewhat indented timer is off. You could then specify whether or not this is Axis or Allies, and that just determines a couple of the logic components on the inside and how it behaves and who gets to see the icons. And then you can also then trigger that it becomes spotted. This means that the opposing side gets to see it. By default, all units, by the way, are Axis. So if you don't hit either of these buttons or trigger either of these buttons, then it's going to be treated as Axis. Oh no, I lied. I had wanted to change it and I did. If you don't hit either of these buttons, it's both. Both sides will see all the icons. And spotted will mean nothing or take no effect. Then these are some things that you can do to all of the 10 artillery units. And you'll see a common pattern here when we look at the other units, but you can repair them, damage them, destroy them. You can set them to be high, medium, or low force complete. So like, for example, a high force complete turns on lights at night and also like basically stops attack. They remain still even under attack. Medium means they just defend themselves, and low means they're really pretty aggressive. You can set up green or red flares. That stuff's easy to change a little bit if you wish, and you can turn them off. And this little module right here just kind of like by default repeatedly sets it to low so that these guys keep going. And we could set it in such a way that after being defeated a number of times, they also repaired themselves if we wanted to keep them alive for forever. This little doodad right here is the spotter. This is the thing that's connected directly to the 2 check zones. And this guy you set to either be Axis or Allies. That actually controls which of the check zones is active. And what that means is that if you have this to be Axis, then when Allies fly over, it'll hit this trigger. And so this trigger triggers the spotted. Turning things off makes them not do anything. So that allows you to disable whole sets of units, and this is actually one of the most handy things that's in here. It's like you can have a whole big chunk of logic and things that are going on. You turn it all off, and you can still allow something on the outside that's sending signals to it. It won't have any effect unless that thing on the outside happens to turn it on. So in the case of this dude, turning off doesn't do much. It well basically means the check zones are both off, and you'll have to hit one of these to turn the check zones on. And that's kind of how it operates. While turning off down here means doing things like saying fire flare or changing its force complete, excuse me, will have no effect whatsoever. Having it turned off can also mean that there are none of the outputs. And for the artillery, and the reason that we're looking at this first is it's way the simplest, as we'll see in a moment. For the artillery, the outputs are just whether or not we've got damage to them, killed, or spotted it. Artillery, by the way, don't work with leader and groupings, so literally every single unit is directly connected to those outputs, as you can see right there. And these are the icons. These icons right here are the ones that are displayed and or not displayed, depending on whether or not you're on the same side and whether or not it's been spotted. And so really, that's kind of it for the front line. It's just frontline icons that are seen by everybody all the time, 2 sets of artillery, a translator influence area, and a single airfield. These guys are all organized right now in the whole sprue, by the way, in such a way that they just basically stupidly interact as best as possible. It's really just as best as possible because, like, for example, and that's actually why I have it put here in the Crimea, is that way I have everything that I need. I have road, I have rail, I have river, so I got all the stuff I need, and it's side by side. That's why I chose this area in this map. But that's really about it for that. For the airplanes, it's a bit more complicated. So we'll look at the actual components that interact before we look at how they're controlled. We'll see there's a check zone here. This is also for the icons. By default, it means that this set of icons, which kind of represents the base that the airfield are coming from, and some artillery that are there with it, and these are the possible airplanes that can be taken off. These are the waypoints that indicate the route it goes, and there are 4 possible routes. Route 1, well, Route A, Route B, Route C, and Route D. And it will only pick one of those. You can configure it that it goes out one route and comes back a different one, but by default it goes out in the same route. And then it has an action section where as soon as it gets to its out point, before it heads back, it begins to act. And it will fly to a waypoint, right now set to low priority. I also, by the way, have these at different elevations, but that's up to you to choose. The way this behaves is the same all the time. And then it will do something. By default, I have it like level bombing, effectively. It just drops its bombs or its paratroopers or its supplies. But of course, you just change this to whatever it is you want to change it to, and it will do that thing instead. This timer is actually somewhat independent of how it operates. There's a logical timer on the inside that determines when the planes are actually done doing their actions. And so generally, this timer should always be longer than the one that you have internally, but it doesn't really matter that much. Additionally, these guys are all, as I mentioned, programmed in such a way that they're relatively sane. If it runs out of bombs, they don't just stay around attempting to continue to attack the ground. They'll actually start headed back. Or guns, or ammunition. Another handy thing for those of you who have built missions is that trigger is also delayed from after it enters the game, because otherwise you get situations where if you activate fighter planes, they actually trigger bingo bombs on activation. So you have to hold off on that trigger for a moment. You have to effectively deactivate your way out of it. We'll talk about that, or those kind of details, at some future time, or anytime I make a video that's about the nitty-gritty of this. But the goal of this system and the goal of this kind of discussion right now is to show that like anybody can use this system, and they can build up their own missions with it and get a huge amount of flexibility and just reliability when it's really pretty fussy to build missions on your own from just the base components. So yeah, that's essentially what essentially occurs, is that you have some artillery, and these are just kind of like there to be, these get turned off if the whole system gets turned off. They can be triggered to do things like reload or launch a flare or become low or high when the airplanes either take off, land, come back, complete their mission, fail their mission, all that kind of stuff. That's up to you. But essentially this is 4 possible flights of aircraft that by default take off, fly their route, and land. Actually, by totally default, they start in the air, but it's very easy to switch them to take off and land. That's built into this too. And there's a timer, again for mission builders, there's a timer built into the landing and taking off and the entire mission. So that if they all get destroyed or like something kind of bugs out, it still doesn't control the it doesn't destroy the overall flow. So like for example, if you wait for these guys to come back and land before you want to trigger something else, you will always get that comeback and finish mission message of some variety, no matter what happens out on the field. But it does keep track of them dying and so forth. And so these guys by default also go in sequence or go randomly. One of these 4 flights will occur. And these are 4 flights of 5. I really wanted to use 4 flights of 6, but if I do this whole sprue with 6 and 6, it's a little bit too heavy on the mission. So with the number of ground units, in particular the ships are very expensive. I can only do 10 aircraft AI. I would certainly like to do 4 times that, 5 times that, but whatever. So I have in here some Ju-88s, and I should point out that that's using bombers, which are much more expensive than fighters. I could probably do 7 and 7 of fighters, maybe even 8 and 8. Some Stukas, some Ducks, and some 111s. And I got them kind of loaded out in a certain way, but this is like intended to be somewhat random. So yeah, these guys take off. They fly to this egress point. When they fly to this egress point, it randomly chooses one of these routes. It does display the route on the map. And if your opponents, the Russians, had flown over and reconned your base, they would see what route you were flying. It came, and then you come out and you get a, and over here, I'm going to kind of move it out of the way so you can see it a bit. There is a whole set of, well, I need to not save this. Remind me not to save. There is a whole set of icons around this guy too that make a big like zone basically, and you can change that stuff if you wish, but those are also just displayed. So you see the icons for the road, you see the icon or the route that they take, and you'll also see icons for where they're attacking, and we'll look at that when we look on the map. And you can set it up such that one reconnaissance pass over here only maybe shows the base, another reconnaissance pass shows the route, and another reconnaissance pass shows the attack zone. But right now it's basically for this set of air units, one reconnaissance pass will show the whole thing, and that reconnaissance is visible to the opposing side only for a certain amount of time. Also something that you can configure. That way reconnaissance is continuously necessary, especially since you have no idea which route these guys are going to take, and there's no consistency between, by default, different plays in the mission. It's random which route they take. You can make that be consistent or deterministic, but that's for you, the mission builder, to decide, and for me, the mission builder, as I start making out missions, to decide. So on to the insides. So on the insides, this is obviously considerably more complicated, the logic in here. This is the same. This is for the artillery, and it's the same artillery we looked at behind on the front line. This, however, I need to move this guy out of the way. This is one of those turn-offable timers. In fact, I'll show you that really quick. This turns the timer on. This turns the timer off. This will trigger if the timer finishes its timer. It will not trigger at all if you've turned it off before the timer triggers. And this sets the time. It sets it as a quarter of the total wait time. We'll describe why that is, and that's as fine as we can make it. So, you know, like, so this is a minute and a half, so it's really about 6 minutes of time. And it really is just about, there's a little bit of uncertainty in there. We'll talk about that later too. This controls the actual airplanes coming in. Again, I'll show you this. This stuff is pretty complicated on the inside, but not hugely so. I've really worked very hard to strip this down to as minimum complication as possible, because the number of these timers increase the size of the mission, and the increased size of the mission reduces performance. So this turns on the aircraft, this turns off the aircraft. And to be clear, this unit all by itself, these control units in here, would work. You could turn it on. Actually, I should walk through these first. This selects the 4 flights of aircraft in a reverse way, so it would select flight D, then flight C, then flight B, then flight A. This goes forward, it would select flight A, then flight B, then flight C, then flight D, and you can go forward then reverse, but kind of, because I have some logic in here that controls assurance that each flight is only triggered once, and all 4 flights get triggered on 4 triggers. This is random. It will randomly select from one of the 4 flights, and this lets you very explicitly pick, take me to flight 1. But again, this follows that logic. So if you say take me to flight 1, and then flight 1 returns, and you say take off with flight 1 again, it will actually go to flight 2. Because it'll never trigger the same flight twice, because that flight came back and is missing aircraft, and it just wouldn't operate correctly that way. And then these are the things you can do to it, very similar to the kind of proxies of different controls you can give to units that I showed for the artillery. You can repair, you can damage, you can destroy. Obviously, these are pretty much for debugging. You can set it to force complete high, medium, and low. You can set off a green or a red flare. Again, you can change those colors. I just didn't want to add too many. And then this is formation. No formation at all. V formation, left formation, right formation. You can change those. And this is finish. This means, hey, come back to your ingress point and land. No, almost no matter where you're at. Like, just come do that. And then this turns it off. This straight up deactivates all of it. The outputs are I've taken off, I've been damaged, I've killed, I've landed, bingo fuel, bingo guns, bingo bombs, bingo cargo. And this is all set up like, I mean, obviously you have access to this stuff with the regular aircraft plane, pulling in mission items for you, but this is all configured to be handy and nice, and it works from one single trigger, regardless of which of the 4 flights you have going on. This says ready. This is basically the flight has taken off or has made it to its egress point. And we'll show that in a second. This is done. This means it has come and landed. And it's really what it is it's given a land command and then a certain amount of time. Once it's been given, it reaches its ingress point, or one other condition happens I'm going to ignore right now, and it starts landing. And it's given a certain amount of time to finish landing. When that time passes, it says it's done. I didn't want to have it be locked to actual landing, because actual landing can fail so much, planes can die, all kinds of stuff can happen that's just inconsistent, and I wanted it to always be able to say done. But you can still always check for landed and do stuff depending on if landed happens. Including kind of avoiding this done being called. We'll talk about that later. And then out means all 4 flights have gone through their business, and there are no more flights that can be had on this. And so this is super handy for chaining different groups of things happening. So you can say like, hey, these airplanes take off and we run 4 sorties, and when those 4 sorties are done and something else happens, it might be another set of aircraft take off, stuff like that. So to demonstrate, that controller controls just this. In fact, it doesn't even control these, but it controls everything but these check zones right here. And if you use just that controller and these units right here that are all wired into it, you would have your planes take off, fly to this egress point, spin around here for a while, and unless you triggered something at that point, which you could if you wanted to, it would wait for a number of minutes, a large number of minutes actually, and then fly to their ingress point and land. Or you could have it as soon as it reaches the egress point, it triggers that ready trigger on the right side. You could have it immediately come back and land. The next controller is for the waypoints themselves. And these I should really point out. You'll be able to see it a little more when we look at the rail, the road, or the river. These next 2 controllers are, here's the controller for the waypoints, and this is a random 4-way waypoint. It could go one of 4 possible routes. And this is the controller for the actions, the things that do the bombing or attack or air patrol or level bombing. And it should be pointed out that you can chain these guys up in any way you like. If you wanted to do a 4-way route and then another 4-way route and then another 4-way route, that's totally fine. In fact, that's even something we kind of do. So this 4-way route operates like so. Again, it has to be turned on and off. Set it to axis or allies. This indicates whether or not it's spotted. And since each of these things has its own spotted, well, this doesn't have icons. But since each of these guys, this has a spotted, and your artillery, which is kind of your base, has a spotted as well. That's how, if we remember, this looking feature is the check zone controller, and you can see that it's hitting all the spotteds. You can very easily configure this to just turn one of these on at a time, so that it requires multiple flights or passes of reconnaissance before you actually get a full picture of what your opponent's side is doing. So again, back to the waypoints. So you turn them on. You indicate whether you're axis or allies, whether or not you're spotted. You can tell it to change route. You can tell it to change route in the middle of flight if you wish. So it can be going from, if it's on route A, which is this route, it can be going, and I should point out here, you'll see that these waypoints don't trigger each other. They trigger a control system, and that's how all this works. So you can hit this waypoint, and at that point you can say change route. And that's a random command, and maybe it'll change route to this one. And that can cause the plane to go like this, and then like this, and then like this. So it depending on how you want. But by default, it'll fly its standard route. It'll go 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. And as soon as this waypoint is hit, since we were going, we can tell this thing to go forward or reverse. And if we're telling it to go forward, or the last thing we told it to do was go forward, when it hits that rightmost waypoint, it will say finish forward. We can at any point, even if I could say it just hit its second waypoint, or it's even in between waypoints, we can tell it to go reverse. And so we can tell it to turn around at any time. And that's actually what we do for in case the units die. So here is killed, and here is out of ammunition, bombs, or whatever. And in all those cases, we do a couple things, but one of the things we definitely do is we tell it to return. And this works great because even if it's already on its reverse course, it just continues on its reverse course. These are what indicate whether or not you chose Route 1, Route 2, Route 3, or Route 4. And so it'll always be the last one. I have that control on and off so that this allows me to have it go so that if I went down Route 1, I also do the attack over here. So these are also a choice. This attack, this attack, this attack, or this attack. You can have this be different, so it can go down Route A and attack on 2, or go down Route A, B, C, or D and attack randomly, no matter what. But you often want them to be linked to each other, especially for tanks, because like tanks, it'd be kind of silly to have them go down a very northern route and then try to attack very far south. But with airplanes, it can actually be highly valuable to have that be random. But that's basically it for these things. You basically connect these guys to each other, and it's super easy. This guy, when it says it's ready, it hits its egress point. It just turns on, give me a new random route, change route, and have me go forward. And it will automatically go forward until it reaches its final destination of forward. Since this indicates which route it went down, only one, we can see this, only one of these 4 triggers will be active. And these 4 triggers determine which of the 4 actions are taken, northeast, which of the 4 in sequence actions activate. And so when this happens, it just goes boom. These are just like the other one, axis, allies, spotted, on and off. And this finish really just turns off a timer in here, because the way that this really operates is that as soon as you hit one of these 4, it starts that action. Hey, attack zone, attack area, whatever, level bomb, and it gives it a certain amount of time. That timer I currently have, you have to go into this unit and set it right there. And I have it pretty short by default right now, so it's got like basically a 4-minute timer to do its action. You can come in and change it, and I might pull that single trigger out here so it's a little easier to get to. And then when that timer runs out, it hits this trigger, and this trigger tells it to go reverse in the waypoints. In other words, it finished its action zone. Now let's go back. And it decides to go back. When it finishes reverse, which is this trigger, so in other words, when it hits its first waypoint, this waypoint, but going the opposite direction, it doesn't happen going the forward direction, or this would all be busted, it says finish. And finish triggers a few things, but ultimately triggers this guy, the ingress. The plane flies to the ingress. As soon as it hits the ingress, it tells itself to land. It lands, and then it says it's out. And in this case, because I have these guys all self-contained, I will show you a little bit of the self-containment on this guy first. At mission start, this guy triggers. In 2 seconds, it triggers this guy. And what this guy does is it turns everything to axis to ensure it's axis. That tells your units to start, and it turns on that dude, and it turns on the units. So it turns on all the things and sets axis, and then triggers this start button. When the start button happens, it decides to randomly pick which unit to run, and also ensures that we're set to a low force complete for the artillery, so the artillery is aggressive, and it turns on the waypoints and the action unit system so that those guys are ready to go. It should also be noted that when the unit finishes, it turns off the action unit and waypoints. And so that's how we get a control that is effectively a flight that can come out and do a reasonably sane thing. And the whole point is that you can take this and move the waypoints around very liberally to create a mission that actually does something. And that totally works. And it really does. And we'll go through those details in just a moment. But first, I'm going to go to the tanks. The tanks, I'm going to barely describe. They're the same as the airplanes. They really are exactly the same as the airplanes, with the exception of being on the ground. And a little bit different control, but really only barely. It's really pretty much exactly the same. And so they have a route A, a route B, a route C, and a route D. I have them set up like this right here. They have some artillery protecting them. This is one big group of tanks. It actually works that way and works pretty well. I have found it to be a little bit performance intensive to have a group that large, and so it can help you out to shrink them. But like it's a trade-off. They have slightly different controls in here because they're tanks. There's the flares, but you will see you have off user. So off user is the current. It'll be the user formation, basically how you have them organized when you activate them. They also have four reinforcements, or four ground units, and they're largely in platoons. But you can say off column, stop, panic stop, and continue. You can of course change those to finish and to turn off. But other than that, it behaves basically the same way. They come out, they go their road, they come back. Ships are the same as the tanks, but they're ships. They're in the water. It's so different. The road is the first one that's different, and the road, river, and rail follow similar patterns. The rail is a little bit special in that it only goes forward. It doesn't turn around. But river and rail are both by default designed to go out and then come back. But you can very easily change that, so they just go out and deliver, or even go out on the road. The difference is that these guys, instead of having an action, they have one set of 4 waypoints and then another set of 4 waypoints, and they have no randomness, so they just always go the same route. They're less expensive, so you can put more of these guys in there. And if you want them to go 4 road routes, well, you just use the tank unit and switch them to on-road column, and then you can have 4 random possible road routes. It's quite easy. And you can even very easily copy and paste the 4 waypoints for the tanks a secondary time to have them move the 8 that these road ones move. So these guys basically are this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, then this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy. And then at this point, they turn around and come back. And that finishes their mission, and then they run their next one. And it really is the same as the stuff I've already just shown you. It's just that it doesn't have an action unit. It has a secondary set of waypoints. And these guys have something a little bit different right here. This is a bit, and this is actually the most fundamental unit. And I'm only calling it out now because it's cool, and we'll talk about it in detail later. And that's really it. That's all the units. You can pull them in, so you can sit there and you can say something like, "Oh, I'm gonna do an all air mission," which you can really do. You can do basically 4 air units. You can do like 2 G air, 2 R air, active at the same time. You might, if you use all bombers, you might have to cut it back to like maybe flights of 3 or 4, or flights of 5 and 3, to have it be performant. But if you don't have any ground units, that'll fly. If you go to just tanks, you can pull in tons. And so like for multiplayer, which is going to be mostly ground units, and maybe just a few AI air units for something like high flying maybe like transports or parachute droppers or like level bombers or something that maybe you just add in for color. But generally, for a multiplayer game, it would just be ground units. You can really put a lot of ground units in the game now. It's totally awesome. So yeah, I'm going to cut this now. All of these guys can be connected in different ways. Those triggers that I was showing you, they can say stuff like, if you had units die, and you can have a counter, 2 or 3 units die, then you could consider it a failed sortie for, like, say, your road units here. Or you could just say, like, hey, if any of them make it back, it's success. And those successes can connect to a unit I haven't shown you yet, and I probably won't show for another couple videos, which is effectively this mission counter and also conceivably supply base. But I hope that everybody really enjoys this. I'm going to stop this part of it now, and I'm going to tack onto the end of this video a demonstration of this inside the actual mission. Okay, so I cut over, and hopefully I did my video editing skills in a cool way that we went right to this. I somewhat doubt that, though. This might even be a separate video. Anywho, um, so this is actually that sprue just loaded in. So it's super dumb. It really is just the units aimed at each other. And like the trains aren't even on the rails, and but whatever. This will demonstrate all the components, and you should be able to see the parallel in here that is in the mission editor that we were just looking at. So first I'm going to show you how the icons are visible only to your own side. So here we can see that if we pick Germans, I didn't even pick a unit, we can see that it turns out that here are the little artillery for every single grouping of units has artillery. So these are the tanks and little tankway, and this is the tank attack area. Here are the airplanes, the air units. This is the air flight here and their attack area. I suspect since it's just started, this is actually going to change in just a second, right when they reach their ingress. Maybe it's already happened, though. This here is the rail units and their backup. These are the two artilleries for the front line. These are the actual front lines here. As you can see, both sides front lines. And this is for the road. And the road units just run off-road column, just down like this. Here's the river, the column moving ships. And here are the ships out here. And we'll look at them in the game here in just 1 second to demonstrate all that going away. And you see it instead the Russian side. Ta-da! And here we'll grab, let's say, just a yak. And I'm actually going to fly it here in a second, and we'll fly over and we'll see that you see the other stuff. So you can see that they're red here. And this will be red even if the Germans see it. That way you can distinguish between the two. Unless I don't understand something, highly possible, the waypoints for airplanes that I picked to do this way so I could show elevation and stuff are just always black. So we're just going to have to deal with that. That's what there is to it. But you can see this is exactly the same. These guys are pointed at each other. And let's go in. It'll take a second, of course. Everyone who's played this knows loading times are loading times. Let me get everything all kind of set up here. This is configured in such a way that it teeters on its current setup of the sprue right on the edge of that multiplayer overload with actually 2 online players. I suspect I will get it a lot more in this mission because I'm running my video recorder and I'm running the server on my computer and I'm running the game. So it's pretty heated in here. So just deal with that. I'm just moving out here while my engine starts and showing you the ships that they're out here. We'll come and look at all the things. These guys are all coming. It looks like these guys ran into each other, probably. No. I think they got a hold of each other and shot each other. That's exactly what happened. That's cool. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. We can see some artillery. And all these ground units are set up in such a way, like by that I mean the static units, that it's very easy to set them out in a nice way. So you can see the tank started from over there, and they're moving this way. And you see these guys are configured well that you can use different units. So see, I have big ones and small ones. Those are not, by the way, specific names for those tanks. I just don't remember specifically which versions I picked. These guys are coming in. They're just about to level bomb, almost certainly. Move to them in a second. Some opposing artillery. We have some friendly. Ooh, nice. So now what we'll do is we may have actually gotten some visible already. No, we don't. I'm going to go fly over one of those. Just real quick and dumb like. I'm going to fly over the opposing side's things, and we'll see that they show up on our map for the reconnaissance thing. And you can certainly limit that reconnaissance to being certain things. I didn't choose the advanced or the complex trigger because it's just so much more expensive. It's tempting to use the complex trigger and would be very easy to add to a mission where only a complex trigger and certain airplanes named something like recon would actually affect it. But right now, any opponent side affects it. I'm just going to do this all in the dumbest way. Yeah, when I play with my dad a good deal, and when I'm playing with him with this exact mission, we very rarely see the multiplayer mission signal at all. So it's definitely that I'm recording video, but it is right on the edge. Cool. But as you can see, everything's just configured to basically interact with one another. Check it out. So yeah, if we were on the German side, that also would have probably just picked up some map visibility. So this is just kind of to demonstrate that all this stuff behaves in a sane way, even in a stupid mission like this, where they're just lined up in order with each other. There's some friendly tanks. I wanted to see our road units, maybe. Yeah, sorry, I have artillery that belongs to the ships. Yeah, look, there's our dumb train sitting on no rails. And the artillery that belongs to our ships actually floats on the water, absurdly. But the idea is that that could be like placed against the edge of the land where the ships were going as defense. And of course, you can literally just take the artillery that's associated with any of the ground units or air units and just delete it if you need more performance or you want to put more different types of units in. That won't hurt anything. And just for the record, when I have my server up, it will be on expert. But the idea here is that anybody, I'm really hoping other folks will use this stuff. I'm going to start in probably Moscow, and then I'll probably start doing a mission out in Stalingrad outside of Kalak. And my goal is to do 3 triptych missions where it'll basically be 3 positions across the front, where the center position is the 2 sides in kind of an equal combat. The leftmost position in most cases, different sometimes, being the Germans losing, and the rightmost position being the Russians losing. And so you basically you'll have to take a series of 3 missions all the way over to your opponent's furthest side and then win that one, and you'll win the whole series of missions. That's kind of what I'm aiming for. But that's arbitrary. Any mission builder can do it any way they want. That's just the way I'm going to do it. So in just a moment, when I fly over this, we should get visibility of just one little artillery kind of angle bracket. And then I'm going to turn immediately south, provided I don't get shot down, that is. Yep, so see how we now see the artillery for the opposing side? Oh, look, and our friends, the B-25s, flew over the other one. And now, when I fly over the tank section, we'll be able to see the opposing tanks. And then that'll probably be about it for this video. Yep. So see how now we have on the map, I have the German tank units. This is the German tank run. This is the German tank zone. Make sure I'm not crashing. This is our Russian tanks. And so they're probably even in combat right now. Not quite yet, they're getting close. And of course, you can be careful about where you put the waypoints so that they either avoid or deliberately go through the trees. Like some of the German tanks or Russian tanks were very good at through the trees. And yeah, and that's about it. So that's how the reconnaissance works. That's how each of the units work. They're flying forward and backwards. These are our these guys just dropped all their bombs, and so they've decided to fly back, even though it took less time than expected. They're attempting to maintain formation, not doing a super great job, but that's not my problem. And these B-25s will come back and land, and then new ones will come out. As for the ducks, the 129s, let's see, they're probably somewhere around here. I don't see them. Maybe they've actually already come back for their landing. Yeah, and that's really the whole story. So right now we can see a little bit of the German side, even though we're Russian. And after a little bit of time, our ability to see some of these German units, specifically the tanks and the 2 artillery of the front line, will go away from us. And we'll have to do more reconnaissance to keep it there. And since these things are quite dynamic, you really do need to keep the reconnaissance going, because the tanks could be going down a very different line the next road, and especially the aircraft could be. All right, guys. So next up, I'll start showing the insides of a little bit more of the logic, and I'll start showing building a true mission with it. And that's about it for now. Thank you.